Hello and a very warm welcome to this month's Pacecast. I'm Anita Pace. Thank you for joining us. My guest today is somebody who knows this area very well. For many years, he's been in the public sector. He led East Riding Council for 23 years. He's a member of the executive team at Wren Kitchens, and he's also the brains and the event director behind the hugely successful Business Day annual event, which I'm sure we're going to talk about a bit later. I'm delighted to say that I'm joined by Stephen Parnaby OBE. Hello, Steve.
Morning, Anita.
Thank you for joining us. And happy Valentine's Day as
Yeah,
we're recording on the 14th of February. I hope you've brought something in to share with us today that is memorable or meaningful for you. So
Memorable, yeah.
Good. Okay. Well, I'm looking forward to hearing all about it. Please share.
I will. Well, don't want to be pretentious or anything, but so I don't know how many other people have brought one in, but rarely bring this out actually, or even bother with it. But that is what the then Prince Charles presented with in 2008. That's my OBE.
Oh, fantastic.
That was something completely unexpected, something that, I never thought would happen anyway. But it was just, I've been very privileged and very lucky to have gone to some wonderful events and different things over the years. But that day in itself was really, really special. They do make you feel as if you're the only person ever to have received one. It's the only event that they've ever held.
Yeah.
And it really is special. So, it was at Buckingham Palace, which I was pleased about.
Yeah. Oh, I'm getting goosebumps.
And you are sort of sent into a room. You're actually presented in the ballroom. But there was about 100 people there. And you're just treated all the time, and you can watch the proceedings that happen in the ballroom. So the people who have been presented, the military generally go first, then the people who have been knighted, then the CBEs, then the OBEs, then the MBEs, Queen's Medal, Police Medals, and so on. So you are ushered into small groups, and then you walk through into the ballroom, sit down, and you're given your instructions before that. And I remember watching it on the TV, and you're so intense on listening to the commentary there. I heard a voice say, "Stephen Parnaby," and oh God, I should be there.
You didn't keep the Prince waiting.
And I thought, I missed that. But no, what they were calling me for, I was leading this group in, which makes you even more nervous. So I think there's about 8 in a group, and then you go in, you sit down, and you're told that your name will be read out, and at the start of your surname, you then stand up and walk towards the Prince, as he was then, on a dais. You 2 paces from him, you move forward, shake hands. He has a chat.
Can you remember what he said?
He said to me, "What exactly do you do?"
Good impression.
And I explained that, and he said, "You'll have seen many things." He didn't ask me how far I'd come, which I was sort of expecting. And I said something, and I can't remember quite honestly what it was, but he laughed.
Yeah.
Now, whether that was just to appease me, but it seemed quite appropriate at the time. And then he told that he doesn't say, "Well, thanks very much, off you go." As he holds his hand out, that means I've had enough now.
Yeah.
Go. And then you shake hands, and then you take 2 steps back.
Yeah.
So you walk backwards, and then you walk off.
Yeah.
And of course, your family or whether your guests are all there watching this, and that worked fine. That was great for me. But the amount of people who forgot this walking back. And you could see it happening. He shakes hands, and then they immediately walked off. Immediately, but 2 paces, and then they're thinking, "Oh, do I come back?" And
no.
And then and the ushers there at the side said, "Come back, just keep coming. It's all right."
They'll be used to it, the royals, though, I'm sure.
And then it was just lovely event, and we went down sort of for the week, or a couple of nights, and I remember coming down the stairs. Back into sort of main reception room. I was this sort of flunky stood on the stairs, and he said, "Are we going somewhere special, sir?" And I said, "Quite honestly, I'm just ready for a pint." And he said, quite honestly, so am I. But then you have your photographs taken and you get your videos, and it is something really special. The interesting thing is I met him sometime at another event, and I can't remember why it came up in conversation, but anyway, it did. And I said, you presented with my OBE. And he said, do you wear it? And I said, no, to be quite honest, I never have. And he said, that's why I gave it to you, wear it.
Ah, and have you since?
No. I don't know why. It almost seemed so wrong because, particularly at civic events and church service events, I mean, I think, people who've got, military medals and that sort of thing, they should be really, I mean, you should be, I am proud of this, but you should be proud of those. But I didn't want to be standing there thinking, who does he think he is? He was awarded that. I fought for the country or whatever, why should it, so.
It's interesting. You said about Prince Charles and meeting him again. I was going to ask you before you talked about the OBE, about having probably met him before, because in your roles, many years in the public sector, I'm sure you've met many dignitaries, royals, etc. So let's talk about that then. Let's talk about, you got your OBE for services to public sector?
Local government,
Local government, yeah. So talk about how your early days as a young boy. Was politics something you wanted to get into? Was that a plan? How did it all start?
Absolutely not. And I've never really considered myself a politician. I haven't. I don't think that's what it's about, and I'll explain that. But as a young boy, if you like, grew up in Woodmansea, older brother and sister, mum and dad, typical village in its day. Mum and dad who, we won't say we were not poor, but we were certainly not even comfortable. We were typical of families in the sort of 50s and 60s. But they were heavily involved in local issues, not local issues, but local events at the church, the school. There was a new village hall built, which they were part of. And so a lot of our entertainment, if you like, and family events, we always went out as a family, were village events. And I grew up with committees. Mum and dad were always at a committee meeting somewhere. I remember going, like, even as a tiny baby, because you had to go with them and that sort of thing. These committees, and I suppose somewhere it sort of fascinated me. And throughout my life, I've always been on a committee somewhere. Yeah.
You must be the only person I know who say they're fascinated by committees.
That's true. I should get out more. And even when I was, when I was a member of Young Farmers, I suddenly found myself on the committee. When I started playing rugby, I was on the committee. When whatever I've done, I always end up on a committee.
But you must volunteer.
Oh, you do?
Yes. You're obviously a type of person who thinks, I can do this. I'll help out.
And so how all the sort of public sector thing started was when I was first married, moved from Woodmansea, lived in Leaven just for a short while, and then moved to Melton. And I've always had sort of conservative leanings, but I wouldn't necessarily say I'm a definitely, hard tub-thumping conservative. But they were always my sort of ideal, if you like, as opposed to other parties. But, if they do something wrong, I'll say so. And if other parties do something right, in my opinion, I'll say so. But anyway, in those two villages, Welton and Melton, there was a really strong conservative association. And just about everybody belonged it because they used to have good do's. They used to have good events. And so if you wasn't a member, you couldn't go. And typically of me, I mean, by the way, when I lived in Leaven, I was the parish clerk, volunteered for that. And then when we moved to, Melton, I just got interested, as I do, got interested in local events and local affairs and this sort of thing. And then it was coming up to the elections in 1979. And I thought I'll stand for the parish council. Why not? So I remember saying to a chap called Jim Dowsell, who was a sort of leading conservative, I said, oh, by the way, Jim, I'm going to stand for parish council. And he said, well, why are you doing that? And I said, well, I'm just interested and, et cetera, and like to do my bit. And he said, well, why don't you stand for Beverley Borough Council? And I said, Well, I'd never given it a thought. And he said, well, George Lloyd, it was then in his 80s, he's standing down. You'd be ideal. That was it.
That was a start.
That was it. I stood and, 40 years later, I gave up. But I became a councillor to do what I would consider the right things, not for any political ambition.
But were you working at the same time? So what was your profession? Or
in those days, I ran filling stations. But when I first became a councillor, it was an afternoon meeting once a fortnight. It wasn't as intense as but when I finished, all right, I was leader, but even as a sort of a councillor without any responsibility, you're spending a good 2 or 3 days a week these days if you want to do it properly. But in those days, it was very much the council ran itself. I always remember my induction at Beverley Borough Council was going to meet the chief executives, and there were then chief officers. And the chief executive then, in fact, I think he was still called the town clerk. But anyway, a chap called Jim Thomas, got on really well with. Ultimately, I always remember him starting the session by saying, well, welcome to you all as new councillors. Please remember that we and my team, we are the council. You people come and go.
Yeah, you're dispensable.
Yeah, and he said, we consult you and you set the budgets and this sort of thing with our advice.
Yeah.
But actually, we run the council, and that was basically the induction. And you never had any sort of, get-togethers or those sort of things. It was for the first 4 years of being a councillor, I hardly spoke. Certainly in full council, at committee meetings, maybe I did. But I was in awe of all these people. I was 28 as a councillor.
That's when you started as a councillor, yeah.
That was highly unusual. There was a couple of other sort of younger ones, but with all due respect to people who probably most of them have gone now, all tended to be in the sort of 60s, 70s, even 80s. But there was some sort of, for me, big names, big personalities who I was not saying awe of, but you listened. I did a lot of that 4 years was, I wouldn't have done what I've done without that first 4 years, without listening to people, watching people, see how they got things done. And also, actually, to think, well, do you know what? He's really good or she's really good or whatever. And, oh, God, I can't think anything to that particular person. I'd never want to be like that. So I learned that. And then, anybody starting as a new councillor, they tend to be 4-year terms. And I always say to people, you don't know anything until your first 4 years.
Yeah.
After that, you'll be amazed how much you know. And, it just went on from there. But everything that's happened to me, from being a committee chairman to being leader of Beverley Borough Council, and then none of it, from my perspective, was planned. It just happened.
You're obviously enjoying it, though.
Oh, yeah, I loved it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What was it about, what was it about being a councillor that you enjoyed so much?
I love getting things done. I always felt that don't become institutionalised, don't become part of the council, try and approach it as you would as a resident. Try and look at things from the outside, because that's what we should be doing. That's what that's what we should have been doing. That's what should happen. The council becomes accountable to their shareholders, if you like, which are the residents, and you're the residents' representatives. You are not the council's representative to the residents. It's the other way around.
Yeah.
And I also felt as well, and this is back to the political side, 95% of what councils do is not political. And it's a shame that it's got more political over the years.
What do you mean by that when you say that?
When I first joined, and I was saying about the people who were there in that particular era, generally speaking, there'd been independent councillors. And then it became political then. And so the vast majority on Beverley Borough Council, probably as you imagine, joined the Conservative Party. So the largest group was the Conservative group. Didn't really matter because there was an independent group anyway. And if you're going to get things done, deals have to be done behind the scenes and that sort of thing. And then, so that was the first thing that happened in those days. And then councillors started to get paid, and paid reasonably well, I have to say. And I think what's happened now, to some extent, not in every case, but people are becoming career councillors. And to me, that's not the right thing. That's you shouldn't be doing it for that reason. You should be doing it for the sort of greater good, for the public good, for your local ward. But they become councillors, and they almost think they're in Westminster at Prime Minister's question time and doing all this, that and the other. I mean, it was very often at group meetings, people would come forward with the most ludicrous suggestions of motions to put before council. You know, they'd probably now be putting one down, want to put something down about Ukraine or, you know, what's happening in the world. And I say, look, you know, we actually empty bins, we look after old people, we tidy the streets, you know, we do all those things and we do it wonderfully well. We have no control over those particular issues. And if something happened now, can you imagine Keir Starmer saying, oh, just a minute, East Riding Council, they're putting a motion to, we better wait and see what happens to them. You know, but it gives them their theatre in the full council meeting to pontificate and speak.
Yeah, I can imagine.
And it's a complete waste of time. And so they are more politicians than ever I thought I was. I'm probably a local politician, but it was nothing to do with national things. And I never... to be quite honest, never got any involvement from the National Party. I mean, I suppose if you did something really nasty or really wrong, you'd be thrown out or this, that and the other. But to be fair, they just let you get on with it.
So when you were... Sorry, go on.
No, go on.
Well, when you were leader, am I right in thinking it was 23 years? You were leader...
23 years at East Riding, and 5.
So what sort of leader would you say you were?
A great one. It's funny actually. When I said I was finishing, I remember it came out that, you know, a year before or thereabouts, and it was actually Hull City Council's full council meeting
where you announced you were retiring.
And it was mentioned there by somebody. And somebody at the council meeting said, do you realise Steve Parnaby's done 23 years and he's never been challenged? And Steve Brady, who I got on with really well.
Who was the leader of Hull City Council at the time.
Yeah, Steve said, God, 23 years and not challenged, that's better than Putin. Sorry, so what type of leader was I? I like to think consensual. And I think any leadership, whether it's public or private sector, the big issue is communication.
Well, yes, I agree with that.
And but not just, and that covers a wide thing, doesn't it? And when you go into somewhere like County Hall, there's 2,000 people work there. But it's simple things like saying good morning to people when you're going in. Chatting to people in the corridor, finding out about people. I used to spend a lot of time making visits to council depots, leisure centres, libraries, you name it, out there across the East Riding, which covers 1,000 square miles. Get people together, talk to them, that you're real, and then people who are closer to you. I mean, I really hate this expression, my door is always open. Well, that's okay, but dare you come through it? Yeah. Because a lot of people are shouting, I'm busy now, clear off, So, you can leave your door open. What the real trick to me is taking people through the door. And again, I used to meet people on an individual basis, and if people are uncomfortable with that, say, look, if a group of you want to come along and sit down, we'll talk about things, and whatever's on your mind, say it, this is the place, nobody's listening, nobody's watching, tell me what your concerns are. And you find out about people. So communication is that big thing. And then, of course, we had Conservative group meetings and council meetings so that people are met with surprises.
People don't like surprises.
No, and you take people with you. And at the same time, I think people in any walk of life like strong leadership, and they like decisive leadership. So when the time comes, or at times, most of the time, you have to make a decision. So make a decision, and people might not always like it, but I think they'll respect you for it, particularly if you've communicated in the right way as to why it's happening.
And it's better to make almost a wrong decision rather than no decision.
Well, make a decision. You can always change it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
But the worst thing you can do is dither and, say, right,
totally.
this is what we're doing.
Yeah.
I think if you spoke to most people, they would say, well, he was approachable all the time. And then you get much more respect, you get much more loyalty. And you can have your disagreements. And, you will do. I mean, at a group meeting, typical conservative group meeting, I would go through, explain everything that was happening and this sort of thing. I can hardly remember ever having to take a vote. I always say that it's always dangerous taking a vote. You might lose.
You might lose, yeah. Don't ask.
Don't ask. Quit while you're ahead. Yeah. So it was always, right, okay, I've heard everybody now. I think where we're going is, and people would nod and say, right, okay, then that's it.
Yeah.
But even with, opposition parties, you don't always get on with people in your own group. But, some great people in, all the other parties and got on really well with them. And you can have a laugh outside and and again, I would go and see them and say, look, this is what we're doing and this is why. And, let's be honest, behind, they would say, oh, look, I'm going to give you hell at full council, but I know what you're doing, Steve.
Yeah.
It's just making those things. So it's about being open, honest where you can. I mean, there's some things you can't be, some things you can't say. And I think that's one of the worst things when you know you can't. And I think any leader would say to you, and this again is, industry or public sector or whatever, sometimes it's a lonely place. But there is one person that I think you can always rely on. And you probably think it's my wife, but no, I can actually. But she wouldn't want to be interested. But I would advise anybody, and I know technologies and this, that and the other moved on, get yourself a good PA.
Yeah.
And I had 3, all brilliant, right for the time. And the last one still sort of helps me now and works with me and so on. But if you've got a PA, they need to know everything about you.
Yeah, one step ahead of you almost.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's a good PA. Yeah.
And they need to know the way you're thinking, how you would react. And they, even things you're doing in your private life and almost, that they know about. So they can actually answer the phone, talk to people and so on.
Yeah.
If you haven't got, sometimes you can't talk to people because of all sorts of different reasons, but you can talk to them and you say, come on, what would you think about this?
Yeah.
And the great ones are that when you would, going back, you write something down and they would type it out, but, you would do an email and I would say, you send that to so-and-so. And next morning, come in and say, are you sure you want to send that email?
Yeah. You slept on it.
No, I don't think I know. I didn't think you would. I'll bin it then, shall I?
Thankfully she didn't send it.
Or, when it was like more letters,
you
knew damn well it had been altered.
Yeah. So you'll have met thousands of people from all walks of life, including royals.
Yeah.
Anybody, share some of your most memorable moments. I'm talking more when you were a leader, perhaps, rather than in the earlier years.
Lots and lots of members of the royal family. I remember when Queen and Prince Philip came to in the Jubilee, which I can't remember which one it was, but they had lunch at Beverley Racecourse and I sat next to Duke of Edinburgh, Prince Philip. And, what a lovely man. Complete, as you see him, characterful and so on. I couldn't say I've ever had a conversation with the Queen, as she was, the late Queen. But I've been fortunate enough to meet her a few times, met Prince Charles, met Prince Andrew, I've not met Prince Harry or Anna, but Princess Anne.
They're going to say Meghan.
William, rather. No, I've been really fortunate. I've been to some lovely places, been to some very special events. In the political world, clearly been into House of Commons, House of Lords a lot. Been to Downing Street, been to most of the government buildings there. And you know what? This might sound strange, but people often say to me, who's probably the best speaker you've heard? And without doubt, it's Tony Blair.
Right. I was going to ask you about prime ministers.
Yeah. I mean, whatever you might think of him and this, that and the other, God, if anybody can read a room and make a speech, he's clearly got some notes somewhere. He must have. But if he can make it sound spontaneous and it sounds really sincere.
Yeah, that's it. It's the sincerity, isn't it?
Yeah. He was brilliant at it.
Yeah.
So, you can admire people without always agreeing with everything they do.
Absolutely.
But he was probably the best Conservative leader of the Labour Party for a long time. And then, let's be fair, you make some right.
Yeah. Do you want to share who you think perhaps wasn't up to it?
Well, I think it's difficult to think of anybody who was up to it post Margaret Thatcher, actually. No, but not so much that. You can meet some quite rude people, dismissive people. I honestly, if I could think of a name, I would tell you, but who do you think you are? Sort of attitude.
You're talking about Westminster specifically.
Yeah. So I had little or no time. They maybe didn't have little or no time for me either, because I can be blunt.
Yeah.
Say it as it is.
That's the Yorkshire in you.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. I mean, my sort of claim to fame, if you like, was when I resigned over poll tax.
Oh, did you?
Yeah.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. It was. God, what a story that was.
A lot of people weren't know what poll tax was.
Community charge. It was one of Maggie's wonderful ideas, which was her downfall.
Yeah, it was really.
And it's where people paid rates in the past. And typically, this is one of the reasons I stayed in the area I represented, was, people living in small townhouses, little cottages, were paying £150 a year in rates. Suddenly you were faced with a £400 each community charge bill.
Because it was on the individual around the property, wasn't it? Yeah.
So you get an elderly couple who were paying £150 and all of a sudden they had to find £800. It was scandalous. It really was. Yeah. And then for whole families, if you were over 18, you could have 4 or 5 people paying that £400. And I'll be honest, there was a little bit of political manoeuvring here. I think it was either 89 or 90. It must have been late 89 or... No, it would probably be 90. Anyway, so there was 9 councillors in Cottingham. And I got them all together because, to be fair, the Liberal Democrats, well, the Liberals I think they were called then, but had taken most of Hessel, they'd taken Willoughby, they'd taken Anlaby, and Cottingham was, their next. That's where they were going to wipe us out.
And that's where you were.
And that's where I was at the time. So, sorry, I was a member of Cottingham. So I got the other 8 together and said, look, we've got to do something. And I was chairman of the council finance committee at the time. And I said, I think I'm going to resign as the finance committee chairman because, I just don't believe in this and it's just all wrong. And it's not sustainable. And if we go with this, we'll be wiped out in 91, was the election coming up. So anyway, we chatted about it and I said, well, I'll tell you what, if you will, why don't we all resign? And so they agreed. Leadership, you said. Yeah. It wasn't as easy as that.
You didn't go for a vote, you just said, what I'm hearing is...
So anyway, we organised this press event for a particular day in March. And we drip things to the press, how that works. Yeah. We had all sorts of politicians come down and ringing me up. I'd heard of them before. And local MPs came to see me and, will you change your mind? I knew it was going to happen. No, that's it, I'm adamant. And so anyway, we held this meeting early one morning in the Civic Hall in Cottingham. But we'd met on the Sunday just to say, right, we're definitely going ahead. And I said, look, there's only one caveat here. I hadn't realised it's budget day. And a chap called Jim Gardam said, he notorious at banging his pen down on the table. And he said, I've had enough of this. If we don't do it this week, I've had enough. And I said, all right, okay, we'll do it. Fine. So we went ahead and with this event, well, the Civic Hall was full of national press. There was the Times, the Telegraph, the Guardian. I'm used to Hull Daily Mail and Beverley Guardian at the time. And God, was it, I mean, like the local reporters were just way out of the depth, TV cameras, and I was whisked all over to do interviews. I was headline on World at 1 on Radio 4. We were headline on the news at 1 o'clock. It was budget day, and we got the headline, and we became known as the Cottingham Nine.
The Cottingham. They sound like villains.
Yeah. And actually, Neil Kinnock was leader, and I was mentioned in Parliament, I think, for probably the first and only time. And it was in the budget debate, and Neil Kinnock got up and said, yet more of your party are deserting you and all this, that and the other. And Margaret Thatcher gave some response, and he said, you're not listening. What Steve Parnaby said is...
Yeah.
And so that did me a lot of good in the Conservative Party. So anyway, he resigned. But it was the most peculiar thing. These days, you'd never have got away with it. But nobody expelled us or anything. I was still chairman of the Finance Committee.
Oh, really?
Yeah. And we all just carried on, but we didn't go to the Conservative group meetings. It was quite good, really.
One less thing to do.
And then, in popularity-wise, but it was I did it for the right thing to do. But in popularity-wise, that stood me in stead for years, because I was known as the man who would stand up no matter what.
Yeah.
And so then later in the year, we kissed and made up, and I rejoined, and the other 8 rejoined, and that was it. And then 91 was the election, got in by outstanding majority, and then I became leader.
And the rest is history.
Yeah.
So I want to move on from the politics in a minute, but before we do that, what would you say were your proudest moments as leader? And then perhaps something that you would do differently now with the benefit of hindsight, or something that at the time you thought was right, but looking back maybe was the wrong decision.
Yeah, that's the hardest one.
Yeah.
And the things that I'm proudest of is financial management of the authorities that I've been involved with. And that might sound a bit boring, because it often is. But unless you get your finances right, you can't do anything.
It's like any business.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So in 95, the shadow year, but in 96 when we started, the East Riding Council, it seemed to have 2 names really. It was always quoted as East Riding Cash Strap Council. And we didn't have a bean. And the first financial year we had to save 35 million quid. So when people talk about savings these days, or reductions, everybody does it. Nothing changes. Nothing's new.
Yeah.
So we had to do that for all sorts of reasons, which I sort of won't bore you with, but we just didn't have the money. We didn't have any money for a capital programme, or very little, probably about a couple of million quid. And then the next year we had to take another 18 million out, and we knew we would have to do. So anyway, we managed, and we got through it. And at that time we were a hung council, so it was consensual, and we had to do all sorts of different things, unpopular decisions, particularly around staff, closing buildings, amalgamating things, clearly not employing as many people, new working practices, all sorts of things that we had to do, which largely were behind the scenes, and at the same time try and build up a pot for capital programme schemes, things like new buildings, highways, etc., all the infrastructure ones. And we did it, and then we became known, the East Riding Council, as the best financially managed authority in the country for many, many years. And when I finished in 2019 at one event, that because I had more retirement parties than Frank Sinatra, really. Somebody mentioned that in that period we'd actually completed £1.6 billion worth of capital works. So those two really are the sort of proudest part. One sort of pretty boring in financial management, but the other is delivering all those infrastructure projects. But the one that's a standout for me, because things happened all over, was the spa at Bridlington. We took a hell of a risk with that, but we achieved it, and Bridlington still is very deprived town, typical seaside resort, struggling, and the people, certainly the residents of Bridlington, felt neglected. They, all the money gets spent in Beverley, all the money gets spent in Hull. If people live in Beverley, all the money gets spent in Bridlington or Pocklington or whatever.
Yeah.
But that's just life, and you carry on. But to do the spa and the money we spent on it was tremendous, and it cost in its day, which is probably about 14 years ago since it was refurbished, £21 million, which was huge. Our biggest capital investment. That was, and it still is, a fabulous building.
It is. It's a jewel in the crown for East Riding.
But what it did, it gave people in Bridlington hope that actually this council is serious about us. Biggest disappointment, probably, is again Bridlington. We didn't get the marina.
Oh, right. Okay.
We had a marina project for Bridlington. It was funded. There was local opposition, not by a lot, but well organised. And the harbour commissioners who run the harbour now opposed it. Cutting a very long story short, it went right through to appeal, and we lost the appeal. And if we hadn't, I believe that the marina would be built now. It would have regenerated that town, because what the town needs is a massive, massive step change. You can't do it in bits and pieces, and that would have. Bridlington has got the second best sailing bay in the country after Weymouth. It would have attracted national events. It would have had a marina there of 1,000 boats in it. It would have had restaurants around it.
So it would be transformative, wouldn't it?
Absolutely, yeah, that massive. So that was the biggest disappointment. Regards doing things differently, I'm sure. If there was a phone in now, there'd be all sorts of people. Why did you do that? Why did you do that? But I'm just a believer in, look, you do what you think's right at the time, or probably what is right at the time. We all make mistakes, don't we? We all regret things that we might have done differently, but you didn't do it vindictively or anything like that. I like to think I'm still always been a positive person. So if you do make a cock up, just how we're going to put it right, and just get on with it. Because if you focus in on always the negatives, you'll never do anything.
No, become risk averse.
Yeah.
So we can't talk about Bridlington. It's a good segue without talking about the business day.
Oh, right.
So the business day started off, I'm right in thinking, it was a bigger event. It was a dual thing with Harrogate, wasn't it, initially?
Yeah.
And then
the
Harrogate side stopped.
Yeah.
And you were very keen that it was held at
No, I'll tell you what happened. So there was an event called the YIBC, Yorkshire International Business Convention.
Right. Yeah.
And it was held in Harrogate with international speakers, American presidents, really, really prestigious events. Yeah.
Amazing lineup of speakers.
And it had about 1,500 delegates attending. Really, really was wow. Paul Sewell and I met with a chap called Mike Firth who ran it, and it was just at the time when the KC Stadium had been built. Now the MKM. That other alternatives are available. But it was the KC Stadium then. And we said, would you run it in Hull as well? And he wasn't that keen. But anyway, in the end, he agreed. And the first ones, I don't really remember, but the sort of speakers were screened.
I remember,
from Harrogate. Yeah. And we sort of watched them on screen. And then as it moved forward, we actually started helicoptering people over, which is really dramatic, and and this sort of thing.
So they'd speak at Harrogate, wouldn't they? And then they'd be helicoptered over to Hull to speak
and the other way around. Yeah,
I remember.
Then the recession came in 2008, and the Leeds event. There was 1,500 people at Leeds and about 600 in Hull. And then in the meantime, we'd refurbished the Spa. I persuaded them to move to Spa because I said it's a better venue, all due respect to KC Stadium. We were in the arena then and then walking across to the stadium itself for lunch and that sort of thing, whereas in the Spa you were all in one enclosure, plus we could get 700 people in. So, and because of the recession, the banks and the financial institutions pulled out of Harrogate, and their audience just dropped dramatically. But we were still okay in Brid. Ultimately, Harrogate collapsed altogether. And then Mike continued running it, but then it was a business, and that business collapsed. So that he finished in 2015. He'd basically gone bust. So 2016, although I tried, there wasn't anything. And then 2017, well, before that, but for 2017, a few people approached me and said, you know what, Steve, you were right. We should try and do something. The proverbial we. Why don't you have a go? So I got a few people together and said, look, okay, I'll have a go at doing something because I really think we can and we should. So tell me what you liked about the previous event and tell me what you didn't like. And then I'll come back with a proposal. They said they didn't like having to pay £300 for a ticket. They didn't like some of the levels of sponsorship. And what they didn't like was just being confined to a table all day. Yeah. Because that was the only people you saw. They wanted more opportunity to network, talk to people.
And these are businesses we're talking about.
People who attended the event. So I came up with this idea of the business day where we didn't have tables. We introduced more networking. Instead of being £300 a ticket, it was £100 a ticket. The sponsorships dropped by 2/3. And so we started that in 2017. Like all things to start with, it was a little bit of a struggle, but we managed it. And every year we've broken even or made a slight surplus. Until these last 3 years where there've been a complete sellout. And as we speak now, for 2025, this year, we're almost at that sellout stage now. And, we've done well. We've had some great speakers.
Yeah, talk about some of the speakers. They've been fantastic speakers.
We've had some great speakers and, some good headline names. I mean, last year we had Bjorn Ulvaeus.
We did, from ABBA.
Which is a real coup. And I mean, he lives in Berlin and he flew over to Humberside and flew back same day, just came specifically for that event. And what a lovely man.
He was, yeah. I was lucky enough to meet him. Yeah.
And he was fabulous. And just so ordinary and down to earth. Yeah. And Joe Malone, I remember, was really good. We've clearly got Piers Morgan this year, but we also had our challenges. I mean, Lord Sugar was just
miserable.
Yeah.
True to character.
Rude.
Was he?
Yeah.
Yeah.
He arrived with these sort of like henchmen, asked where his dressing room was. The spa manager, had some like briefing notes and this sort of thing, took him to his dressing room and the door was closed in his face and that was it. He never came into the green room, left the stage, got into his car and that was it. And then Karen Brady was another one. Never
was she? Because I thought she spoke so well. I really enjoyed her presentation. Yeah. Was she rude then?
Well, not rude, but she just didn't interact. She didn't want to know. But when you keep getting telephone calls, because you're thinking, is she here? Is she here? Oh, she's 5 minutes away. And I said, look, she's got to be sat on the front somewhere in a car because, she can't be 10 minutes away for the last hour.
Yeah.
And anyway, eventually she came. I'm not really, but went to the loo. Went on stage, did her a bit, came off and said cheerio.
And that was it.
That was it, gone.
Yeah.
Whereas you get some people, I mean, Bob Geldof, you can't get rid of him. He was there all day and you get some lovely people, Rachel Fellows from Yorkshire Tea and I'm trying to think, but different other people, Jeff Ram we had last year, have been really good and you should never focus in on the negative people. I mean, the main thing is at the business day, I mean, like we have that headline person.
Yeah. How do you decide who the headline's going to be?
We deal with a particular speaker agency now, but they all have the same people on their books. You're never quite sure who the person's agents are. I'm sure like they all work together and take percentages off and this sort of thing. So you look through who they've got available. You then talk to them and say, look, is there something else? Is there somebody else that you can recommend or somebody coming? That's where Beyond came from.
Right.
So that's, you sometimes get lucky with things like that. But when we first started with the business day, we'd never have got Piers Morgan. We'd never have got Beyond Ulvaeus. With all, we love it and I love it, the spa at Bridlington. But you can imagine somebody in Berlin or in London thinking, you've booked me where?
Yeah.
Bridlington,
Yeah.
But now, because the agents can say, "Oh no, this is a sort of prestigious event, trust us."
And name drop some of the previous speakers.
And also because, let's be fair, if it wasn't like that, I mean, reputationally for high-profile speakers, that's really damaging. So we sit around. There's myself, there's Mark from the spa, there's Karen. My sort of still PA. And we sit around and we throw names around, and then we find out prices, we find out if they're available, find out if they'll come, and we try and do that, by September, October of the previous year, and then move forward from there, and then try and get different speakers to compliment.
Yeah. So do you always start with a headline speaker?
Always start with a headline. Yeah.
Right. Okay.
And then, of course, we have the breakout sessions, which go down really well. And, credit to the sponsors there. I mean, some spend a lot of money on those, as well as spending a lot of money on the stands.
But it is a go-to event. I mean, it's the end of business week. So we have business week that week. And then the business day is the kind of like highlight of the week. And I think it is a go-to event. People try to get there.
But without the sponsors, it wouldn't happen.
Work. No.
So I'm really grateful for them. And we always say each year, it's a bit of a joke, but actually we mean it. Next year will be our best ever.
Yeah. But that's the thing, isn't it? You've got to get better each year.
Yeah, and you've got to change it.
Who are you going to bring back?
It's like anything. It's we're talking about the business day, but you can't just rest on your laurels, can you?
No.
You've got to mix it up a bit. You've got to change it. And, like when the stands are setting up, we say to them, look, no photography. Because what I'm always conscious of, you don't want people walking into the Royal Hall on that morning and saying, well, here we are again then.
Yeah, looks the same.
And it's, wow, bloody hell, there's a hell-skelter there. Where did that come from?
Yeah.
It won't be there this year, but something else will be there and things will change. And you've just got to shake things up a bit, really, to make people realise.
Well, I'm looking forward to it because, as I say, it's a go-to event. It's one of the highlights of the year.
I love it. I mean, I really get a buzz out of that.
I bet you do. And you get to meet all the speakers and that. You get to go on
but it's
behind
just
the stage.
the build-up to it,
the excitement.
and I mean, I'm saying it's stressful. I'm not a lover of the word stress. I mean, you just get on with things. But
your adrenaline's
adrenaline keeps you going. And when you get to sort of 5 o'clock and it's finishing, you think, oh, thank God for that. And it's all
I'll have that
right.
pint.
Exactly.
So I'm conscious of time. There's two things I still want to talk about. I want to talk about the new mayor that's going to be coming into the area and your thoughts on what they need to focus on. And we can talk about that in a minute. But before we do that, you've been in politics a long time. We cannot not talk about what's happening in the States because it's in the news every day, whether you like him or not. I personally do not, but anyway, you can't ignore what Trump's doing. And I would just be interested in what you think about the whole show that's taking place.
It
is, yeah. And I just want to know what you think.
And I think that's the thing. Bearing in mind, the caveat is here, bearing in mind what I said before, I'm not a politician.
Okay, all right. Okay.
I'm a local political whatever.
You must have a view.
But have a view. Sometimes I listen to Donald Trump and I think, well, you're a lunatic.
Only sometimes.
But other times I think, do you know what? I mean, like when he gave his inaugural speech, which I didn't, God knows why I listened to it, but I did. And I thought, God, you're actually talking a bit of sense. And it's got to be that showmanship, hasn't it? Nobody can be that mad. But I mean, like, for what he's just doing in Ukraine now, that you start to negotiate by giving things away, it's just unbelievable. And how many times has he said things, done things, and then retracts them? But you do wonder, actually, quite frankly, you got the, biggest country in the world, most powerful country in the world. Was it 300 million people or whatever? And, the choice of candidates is pretty big. I think me and you could get in there and easy. You can be president, I'll be deputy.
No, I'm not sure about that.
But no, I mean, you do. I seriously, I worry about where the world is going.
Exactly, yeah.
And not for me, you know.
For future generations.
My generation has had the best time. You know, they've had peace, it's had prosperity generally, you know, from what my parents had and, you know, what we've got and this sort of thing. It's been fabulous, but I do worry about my grandchildren and great-grandchildren. What is their world going to be like? Because, you know, it's just not sustainable in all sorts of ways, and that would take us, you know, a long, long time to discuss. So for me, the jury's out, but you know, this Trump has got his America first. That's what gets him in. That's what gets him elected. He needs to hold together the sort of southern states and all that sort of thing that people respect or want to hear him say. You know, it's all about America. Anybody who wants to export things to us, you know, he's going to pay through the nose. And, you know,
but the tariffs are going to cause inflation anyway.
Yes, and look, you and I know at the end of the day it won't happen. And, you know, was going to buy Finland or something, not Greenland,
yeah,
and buy, you know.
Every day it's a different thing, isn't it? Yeah. I mean, anyway, we could spend a whole podcast talking about
if he buys the UK, I mean, as long as we all get a share out and a handout, you know, because we're all shareholders, aren't we?
Oh, my God. Don't say things like that.
Sorry, that's probably not a really good answer because I genuinely don't know. But as I say, it's not just Trump, it's all sorts of things about where the world is going, and it's sad, isn't it?
It is sad. Let's try and end on a positive then. So closer to home, we are in May going to be voting for. Are we calling it an economic mayor? Devolution?
Yeah,
devolved mayor. Devolved mayor.
Yeah.
So. You're not in the running for it.
No.
your political days are over, even though you weren't a politician. But I don't want to talk about the candidates. I just want to talk about if you were in the position of becoming a mayor, or what would you say to the incoming mayor? What do you think they need to focus on?
Like anything, you've got to focus on the economy and you've got to focus on jobs. And that is the most important thing. For this area to prosper, we need to attract more investment from the people who are already here, and that's often forgotten.
Businesses, you mean?
Businesses.
Yeah.
That you help people stay here and you help them expand so that they don't fold or go elsewhere otherwise. So that's your first one. You need to attract new businesses to the area because both local authorities are short of funds. All local authorities are short of funds. The one thing that you can actually create by getting more businesses and so on is business rates, which you can now retain in the local area. So we've got to grow the economy and we've got to tell the rest of the country, rest of Europe, rest of the world that we're open for business. So can I say what I wouldn't like to see? And I know it's massively important. What I wouldn't like to see is a lot of money spent on highway infrastructure, those sort of things, because they come once you've got your development there.
Right.
Nobody ever built a bypass before some industrial estate was built. You build that first and you do it the other. I mean, good example probably is the Humber Bridge roundabout, which is now sort of becoming very congested.
A bottleneck.
Yeah. But until you've got that congestion, you're never going to get the funding to alleviate it. And, already yesterday was mentioned that this HS2 money is probably not available. So when you're bidding for money nationally, you are bidding amongst hundreds, if not thousands, of other schemes. So yours has got to be exceptional. And that's probably one of them. So to me, I would be looking at creating more Melton Parks, more bridgehead sites. We've got land here. We've got good communications, strangely, particularly on the A63,
Do you
M62.
think they're the trains?
So, I was thinking more in terms of distribution, logistics, warehousing. M62 is pretty much still our bit of it. It's still pretty much underused. So what I'm saying is if land allocation is made infrastructure is in place. Most of the planning issues have gone through on things like Natural England, Environment Agency, and all those people who need to be satisfied, drainage boards and Yorkshire Water, etc., so that it's oven ready, and you can get on with it. You mentioned trains, railway. I think the city clearly is getting it heavily congested. And I think one of the things that can be done is the New Melton Station, which could operate as a park and ride. I think the city does need park and ride facilities outside the city everywhere around. If you look at York, that's been tremendously successful. And if you look at that as a model, I mean, I'm really in favour of Tim Rix's Lagoon. Yay! I would transform it. I wouldn't
call it Tim Rix's Lagoon, but yes,
Lagoon. Whether that would ever happen, but never say never.
We can live in hope.
But as I say, it's the first thing to do. It's no use giving a wish list of what we want to spend some money on it unless you've got how we're going to fund it.
Yeah.
So the first thing to do is create some jobs. Create some money that's coming in for business rates, and then the infrastructure will follow. I mean, I hear what people say about housing estates. Oh, well, where's the schools and where's the doctors and all this sort of thing. Nobody ever built an empty school. But, in all the kids in this area, everybody has a school to go to. So you just logistically can't do it that way around. You've
got to create the jobs.
And in that sense, you create the houses first. And then you create the facilities because that's it. But what do I know?
We'll wait and see what happens.
Yeah, but I mean, overall, if we don't get a mayor, well, we are getting a mayor, but without a mayor, we will fall behind.
Yeah,
we have fallen behind. So it's a positive thing, and I'm sure whoever is elected will be passionate and do things, and I wish them well.
Yeah. Well, we all do. Well, thank you, Steve. That's been fascinating.
All right, Anita, thank you.
Before you go, we have a question. So we have a tradition where the last guest leaves a question for the next guest without knowing who the guest is going to be.
Right.
So it's just a question that they've left. We did, in fact, have 2 guests on the last podcast. So I have 2 questions for you. I'm going to give you the choice. You can choose which question you want to answer. So it's, what are the most important 3 words that best describe your future success? Or, what's the most valuable lesson you've learned from your past failures?
Well, the difficult one is the second one, isn't it? Lessons learned from past failures. Don't take yourself too seriously.
You don't strike me as somebody who would do that anyway.
Yeah. And, I've said before, look at it positively, but as long as you do your best, that's the main thing. But at the end of the day, life's too short, so just get on with it and don't harp on, don't dwell on the past. Don't dwell on the past.
Yeah.
Look, probably the second question, just dwell to the future.
Yeah,
and
that's good. Yeah.
And if you look, everybody gets things wrong.
Yeah.
I remember. Can I?
Yeah, carry on. Yeah.
But I remember Terry Leahy when he was chief executive of Tesco.
Tesco, yeah.
He spoke at the YABC.
Yes.
And one of the things that strikes me, I'll tell you another one. I'm talking about supermarkets. I'll tell you about Ken Morrison as well.
Oh, I saw him. Yes.
But Terry Leahy said, "Look, as chief executive of Tesco, we have made mammoth mistakes. Like going into China, opening up convenience stores and this sort of thing, and getting it all wrong and having to revamp some of the marketing things they've done in the stores." But he said, we as a company just get away with it, just stop doing it. He said, if you're in the public sector and you make X headlines and people have got to be sacked and heads have got to be rolled.
Because you're accountable.
He said, yeah. He said, I would never have lasted more than a month at Tesco. But then the other one, I must tell you this story for people who haven't heard it, you will have done, but whether you remember it, Ken Morrison spoke at
Morrison's supermarket. Yeah.
And I always remember him saying that when they bought Safeway, it was the deal of the century because supermarkets were costing a fortune to build and this sort of thing, and everything was at a premium. And I can't remember what the figure was, but he bought all these supermarkets and it was for nothing. But he said that was the first time he ever encountered, I am one now, but a non-executive director. And he said, I had no idea what one was. But he said, can you tell me the difference between a non-executive director and a supermarket trolley? And he said, well, I'll tell you the answer. You can put more booze into a non-executive director.
And are you a non-exec director by any chance too?
Yeah. I haven't had the booze yet.
Oh, thanks for answering the question. Thank you. And thanks again for coming today.
I've enjoyed it.
Yeah,
I hope it works well. Thank you.
I've really enjoyed it. Thank you.
Good.
Right, that's it this time. Thanks for joining us. I look forward to seeing you again next month. And until then, bye-bye.